Hello once again and welcome to Amiga Reviews. I'm the eager Amiga Eagle. No change given. Today's video is all about a novel 3D racing game called Stunt Car Racer. While coming out on multiple platforms, it's mostly known for the old Amiga due to its, for the time, smooth gameplay and immersive graphics. Originally created by Hallowed Games designer Jeff Crammond, whose games mostly revolve around motor racing in one form or another, Stunt Car Racer happens when you mix roller coasters with V8 engines. In the late 80s to early 90s, 2D racing games were gradually making the transition to a more 3D aesthetic, although the look was still considerably blocky and rectangular. Every so often, a game comes out that lights the touch paper of a technical revolution, and in this case, it was Hard Driving. Released in 1989, Hard Driving was one of the first games that made a huge jump in simulated driving realism, making massive advances in the driving experience, including manual transmission and a working clutch. Its main track had sections for speed as well as incredible stunts, like a bridge jump and a loop-the-loop. I remember not seeing anything like this before and spent a lot of time in the arcade trying to perfect my driving technique, which was not easy. But I would even go so far as to say that it helped me to understand how to drive long before I actually learned to drive. The home versions of Hard Driving were a mixed bag, ranging from good to awful. I'm looking at you, SNES version, but they were nothing like the arcade. Stunt Car Racer came out a year later in 1990, and from my perspective, it was one of the closest games to replicating the Hard Driving arcade. I have heard that Hard Driving was a massive influence on the development of Stunt Car Racer. Blending 3D environments with a 2D vehicular cockpit, the combination works strangely well. You sit in your space frame racing car with the wheels and engine laid out in front of you. There are other nice little details like the wheels, despite being 2D, responding to the track, bouncing up and down as you take on and leave the assorted trials. In the same way as Trek's Warrior, the combination of 2D and 3D work rather well, complementing each other rather than contrasting. Taking place on an elevated racetrack sporting a fetching red and white colour scheme, Stunt Car Racer takes the concept of occupational hazard to a whole new level. The racing tracks range from a few feet off the ground to nose-bleedingly high crests, quite often with a death-defying jump thrown in for good measure. There are no signs warning you of any obstacles or direction changes, and there is also nothing stopping you from slipping off the side of the track to a heart-sinking drop and a bone-crunching landing. Legend has it that the reason the tracks were elevated was to stop players from simply driving off track wherever they wanted, without reverting to things like invisible walls. On that front, I would say mission accomplished. The races are started with your car being dropped onto the track by crane. There is no ready, steady, go. As soon as the chains are released from your car, you can set off. There is a slight difference when playing two-player, as your car is noticeably replaced to make way for the other car compared to single player. Race management is an integral part of the race, as you have two significant factors to take into account: damage and nitrous. Damage is an obvious one. If you jump too high, land too hard or fall off the track, you will take damage. Damage takes two forms. The first is a crack that, not always, gradually works its way from left to right across the top of your race car's frame. Once it reaches the far right side, you are done for this race. The second are tabs that become holes when you have a large crash or a heavy landing. The main difference is that the former damage is reset after every race, whilst the latter stays for the remainder of the season. Again, once the tabs are all gone, your whole season is over. So the more damage you take, the more carefully you have to drive for the rest of the race. For each race, you are also allocated a certain amount of nitrous boost. This will deplete as you press the boost button, but gives you a considerable surge in acceleration. This is essential if you are falling behind. However, you only have so much, and unlike a lot of today's racing games, When it's gone, and towards the end of the race you may need all the nitrous you can spare. Gaining an early lead is definitely to your advantage, as catching up and overtaking the other car can be a difficult task. You can see how far in front your opponent is by a small distance readout on your dashboard. The main problem is crashing off the track, because when you do, you are hoisted back on in the same way as when you start, but it is a very long-winded process that gives your rival plenty of time to build up a big lead and can be extremely difficult to claw back. This can lead to further rash driving, which in turn can lead to even bigger crashes. Sloppy driving is not rewarded in Stunt Car Racer. Also, how on earth do those teeny tiny cranes lift the cars up so high? Racing takes the form of either one-player practice or one-on-one season races. I would certainly recommend spending a fair amount of time practicing the various circuits, because it is very easy to misjudge a jump or skid off at corners if you're going too fast. However, season races take on a whole new dimension of difficulty when you are trying to overtake another car on what is essentially a very thin track. It is quite interesting to see the other car and how it behaves on the courses, because despite the fact the 3D graphics are rather rudimentary, the physics are very accurate. The cars jump, bank and rotate in mid-air, and you do get the feeling that the other car behaves very similar to your own. Each season takes place over the course of 8 races, but you only get to see the ones that you partake in. The tracks that you race on will depend on the league that you start the season in. There are 4 leagues, each racing on 2 circuits specific to that league. For these races, you take on the mantle of what can only be described as one of the Stig's many ancestors, whilst the rest are a motley crew not unlike the sort of races that appear in the Micro Machines games, or indeed became a staple of 90s racing games in general. Usually, there are 3 other racers in your league, and each one is either inept, reasonably competitive, or nigh on unbeatable. And it does not take long to work out which is which. Depending on how many races you win or lose, you will move up or down the leagues. Obviously, the higher the league, the more difficult the opposition and the more crazy the tracks. Staying in the higher leagues is a challenge in itself. Everything is nice and interesting until you start falling down the leagues again, and then it is hard to stay invested. Multiplayer is achieved by linking 2 Amigas together, or in the same vein as Lotus Turbo Challenge 2, an Amiga and an Atari ST. This possibly makes Stunt Car Racer one of the first ever games where multiplayer needs 2 complete setups rather than the tried and tested method of split screen, which was the style at the time. Jostling for position and trying to bump your opponent off track makes for some entertaining racing, as does sailing way over the top of your opponent when attempting some of the bigger jumps. It is also extremely funny to see the opponent's car completely overshoot the track when they've completely misjudged a jump. Despite its incredibly basic graphics, this is a very engaging racing game that can have you coming back for more, especially if you're able to play against a human opponent. The novel style of racing, mixed with the insane track layout, ensures that this is a game that leaves an indelible impression on the memory. There are a lot of games out there that have tried to emulate a racing style similar to this. I'm looking at you, Fast and the Furious. But despite the advanced physics and incredible power of today's technology compared to that of the 30-plus-year-old Amiga, Stunt Car Racer still seems to have many of its contemporaries beaten. Stunt Car Racer was released to rave reviews and very high scores across the board. And Jeff Crammond went from strength to strength with his next game, the amazing Microprose Formula 1 simulator, which I'm fairly sure will garner a review on this channel at some point in the near future. Stunt Car Racer was a unique, epoch-making game which preceded titles like Virtua Racing, Sega Rally and Ridge Racer by a good few years, and we did not see games with such crazy tracks again until the likes of Mario Kart, Burnout and the Fast and the Furious games up to a decade or more later. But I would still say there are few games around today that can match the competitiveness and sheer madness that is Stunt Car Racer. Thanks very much for watching. If you enjoy my videos, a like and subscribe would indeed keep me on the right track. And do please feel free to check out my other videos. I'm the Eager Amiga Eagle, and of course, see you next game.